On one of the biggest days of the year, the Winnipeg Jets had one job, and unfortunately, they failed in a pretty bad way.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Well, tonight we are sifting through the wreckage of the NHL trade deadline, and I can't lie, I was pretty pissed off earlier today. Winnipeg really came in needing to do something big and walked away upgrading 3 depth positions in total. And to me, I don't care how people try to frame this. I completely acknowledge that the Jets have some unique challenges. Small market, remote city, not a lot of people want to waive their trade clause to come here. I get it. Winnipeg has to do things a little bit differently. They don't attract talent the way that other teams do, and that is 100% the case. But what Winnipeg did today was such a tremendous disappointment for what they need to do, and I want to chat about that in just a brief moment. Before we go too much further, though, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, let's talk about what the Jets did do, right? They brought in Luke Schenn, Chris Driedger, and, obviously Brandon Tanev. Now, Driedger was just basically a straight-up swap for Kaapo Kähkönen, which, that's a third-stringer move, and I think it's fine. It actually saved the Jets a little bit of salary, and, Driedger might actually be better than Kähkönen, especially for the moves. So, yay, I guess. The actual roster moves the Jets made were Luke Schenn for a 2026 second rounder and 2027 fourth rounder, and Brandon Tanev for a 2027 second rounder. In isolation, you look at these moves and you're like, okay, why are you pissed off about this? Well, consider that the Jets had basically been on Brock Nelson for the past couple of weeks. Nelson was the player that I think everyone was basically begging for. He's a top 6 center. He's fast. He's, a big body who's mobile beef, and he has legitimate skill. There were some natural risks to his profile. I mean, he is 34 now, and, he is starting to decline in his ability to drive play. But if you're looking at the short term, the Jets really needed to bring in a player of his caliber. Winnipeg right now is still using Vlad Nemesnikov as their 2C. And sure, it might not be a problem in the regular season, but you get to the playoffs, you start facing the Vegases, the Colorados, the Dallases. You are in real trouble if that's your center depth. I think that there's a way internally that the Jets can improve the situation, but they don't want to do it. And so with that in mind, the Jets kind of have to trade for pieces if they want to improve the lineup. Arniel has his way of doing things and his lineup, and it's kind of incumbent upon the Jets front office to do something about it to help him and honestly give him the best options with how he wants to arrange his talent. And for me, I look at this and I just feel so crushed that, we, heard Winnipeg talk up this trade deadline. We heard them talk up their commitment to winning. And in the crucial moment, Winnipeg honestly delivered one of the worst performances of any team at the trade deadline. And I'll say this, the Jets are not alone. A lot of teams out there did a crap job. I think that this was a very unusual trade deadline. Everyone was selling and, or at least everyone was buying, and there weren't that many elite sellers, right? You didn't have a ton of elite talent available. So the few players that were there were going to cost you pretty hefty sums. And I just think that the Jets weren't really serious enough. And I know that sounds really harsh, but my problem with looking at, say, the Brock Nelson package, right? I get why the Jets were not in love with this. The full package was Nelson and William Dufour for Callum Ritchie, a 2026 first rounder that's top 10 protected, and there are some conditions for it to slide to a 2027 pick, a 2028 third round pick, and Oliver Shillington. Shillington was just a toss in. He got moved to Anaheim for some reason. No clue what was going on there, but basically, Nelson brings you. A pretty big haul. But the thing with this whole package is the Jets absolutely could have beaten it. Now, in this particular case, I think Nelson may have nixed the trade himself. If that's the case, then the Jets really can't do much about it. I don't blame them specifically for that. What I do kind of find frustrating is after that, Mikko Rantanen was, one of the next biggest trade options, and Dallas ended up making him not only their acquisition, but they extended him for 8 years. And Rantanen cost Logan Stankoven a 2026 first rounder, a 2028 first rounder, and like 2 third round picks in between there. So, yes, very expensive, but you look at some of the other packages, you think about the Gord trade with Oliver Bjorkstrand. That one, I think, is probably the kind of deal that I was thinking the Jets were going to make. And instead, you watch all of your biggest Central Division rivals not only load up, but load up to the gills. This wasn't just some small little thing. You look at Colorado, and everyone was basically harping on them for their depth. And then they not only get Brock Nelson, they also bring in Charlie Coyle. Now, Coyle, I don't think he's like a difference maker, but you moved out Casey Middlestat, who really wasn't panning out the way that I think anyone expected, and then you bring in Coyle, who's a big physical center, will probably play a decent brand of hockey for you, and he certainly gives you a great third line center behind McKinnon, Nelson, and now you have Coyle. Like, they completely overhauled their entire top 9, and they gave up a lot of assets to do it. But I just wonder, are the Jets just going to sit there or either pee or get off the pot, man? I understand why the Jets feel that there are deals that they simply cannot make. And there are some trades that are out of their control. But then I saw who they brought in: Luke Schenn, Brandon Tanev. And, Tanev is a good vibes guy. Luke's a big physical defender. Neither of them really do much other than help you in case you have some injuries. That's literally it. And I think about the fact that Schenn's trade initially was actually a flip from the Pittsburgh Penguins. That original trade package was, Tommy Novak and Schenn to Pittsburgh. And I'm like, you couldn't have done that yourself, Winnipeg? Like, Novak had no trade protection. And why weren't the Jets in on this kind of deal? If you already planned to get Schenn, then why weren't you going after this? It's really crazy. That package was like Michael Bunting in a fourth. And I feel like the Jets, if they were actually, apparently they were potentially shopping Alex Iafallo, why would you not think about the Novak trade? You could have done that. If you really had to have Schenn, you could have had Novak with him. And so I'm just, maybe Nashville was like, no way, we're not, trading in division. But like, come on, man. I just feel like I'm trying not to get too irritated, but I just feel like Winnipeg really talked up this trade deadline, talked up all of the moves that they were thinking about, and we ended up with like an incredibly depressing, underwhelming, mediocre trade deadline where the Jets not only got not particularly helpful players back, but they also spent a fair bit to bring him in. Nobody cares about second rounders in the grand scheme of things, but those are not cheap assets that you're giving up. And the players that the Jets brought in don't really help that much. I look at the Jake Wallman package and I'm like, you could have done that 100%, and Wallman would have been a much more helpful top 4 defender for your third pairing. But, it is what it is at this point. I feel like if this playoff run ends very early, it's time to clean house in the front office. I think it's way past time that the Jets have a way to actually take advantage of their playoff runs. They don't graduate their prospects at a very particular fast rate. They won't trade them. They are very much the hoarding type of their assets, and I just don't get why. Either you integrate the youth or you trade for talent that can help you right now. Your core is not going to last forever. Connor Hellebuck is not going to have Vezina seasons every single year of his career. We are incredibly fortunate that what we are seeing with him is career best hockey right now. And with the playoff field having been not that great this year, I just don't know why the Jets really wouldn't just commit and make as many big swings as they could. If they did all that they possibly could, I would totally understand and accept that. But we know this team's history. I don't believe that they did. And that really hurts. I really felt like this was a year where the Jets needed to bring in some real help, and they didn't. They just didn't. And you can say, all of the excuses for it. At the end of the day, this league requires a level of performance at a high elite level. If you can't do it, then maybe you shouldn't be making the decisions. I just, if the Jets get knocked out of the playoffs early, all I can say is take a look at what happens with the season ticket holders next season. I don't think that they are going to be happy at all, and they ain't going to be alone. So rough. At least, I mean, you think about it, and even with the trade acquisitions, Dallas and Colorado do still have some questions, but the road ahead is going to be really frustrating for Winnipeg, and I want to chat about that in just a little bit. Before we go too much further, though, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I think, FanDuel for me is a great option, right? Because I'm the kind of person who likes to project big scores and perhaps big performances. I guess now I have to rely on lots of hits for Brandon Tanev. I think he'll probably do that. Luke Schenn, also probably a fair bet to have lots of hits in his upcoming games. I think that's a very easy category for you to win. And if you want to give it a shot, new FanDuel customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you will get $150 in bonus bets. That's $150 for a $5 winning bet. Be sure to check out FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hey friends, and welcome back to the slightly ranty episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode, as I am currently venting a little bit. I am, obviously very frustrated, and I wouldn't really feel this way normally, especially on a day in which the Jets won the second half of a back-to-back against the New Jersey Devils, one of the top-ranked teams in the Metro. But, I've come to the point in my fandom over the past couple of years where I just don't care that much about the regular season. I always look at the regular season as the vehicle to get to the playoffs, right? If you win a President's Trophy, amazing. That's awesome. Phenomenal accomplishment, should not be diminished. But what are you, investing in this sport to do? You are going after the Stanley Cup, and that has to, require a deep playoff run. And for the Jets, right now, what are they? They're a good team. They are one of the top-ranked teams in the NHL. But their opponents all just loaded up, and a lot of those teams have started finding their footing a lot faster over the past couple of months. And with the Jets really struggling to gain ground against teams like Dallas, I just feel frustrated. And we're going to start to get a bit of a better sense of how all of this is going to impact Winnipeg's potential playoff runs here, because we'll be seeing Dallas this coming week on, Friday. Then we get, a couple of other teams over the next couple of days that are pretty tough. You'll have a game against the Hurricanes this weekend. You'll get some matchups against Edmonton, Washington again, we rematch. We'll see Vancouver, which could be a playoff opponent. You'll also see Vegas, LA. I mean, these are really difficult opponents to wrap up the end of the regular season. And I kind of just feel let down. I really thought that Winnipeg was going to make the most and seize the moment and come away with some real upgrades and real rewards for a team that has quite frankly deserved it. They have pushed really hard. And I just wonder, if Winnipeg gets to the postseason, sure, I think that they could probably get through the first round without a lot of issue. Unless something really crazy happens, I don't think either of Calgary or Vancouver, should those be the teams, really scares you. The bigger concern is if something happens and the Jets perhaps start to fall out of the number one seed in the Central. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it would take a lot for that to really be a consideration, but the risk of it is reasonable, right? Because if you fall out of one of those top seeds, you have the potential of facing a Dallas or a Colorado a lot earlier than I think you want to. If you see them in the first round, that's not good for you. That is like not necessarily worst case scenario, but probably close to it. I know Dallas and Colorado do still have some issues. Dallas's defense is a little bit shaky, and Colorado, while I think that they've overhauled a lot of their depth down the middle, their wing support is still a little bit questionable once you get past the top six. But I don't think that's really a problem for them. They've still got an incredibly mobile back end. They've overhauled their goaltending, and their forward depth down the middle is fantastic now. So I look at the Jets and I just feel like this is shaping up to be a missed opportunity, right? If the Jets get knocked out early in the playoffs and they play a really competitive, really great series, then I kind of walk away and say, all right, you played a really good run. You actually were the better team, or at least very competitive against your opponents. You just came up short. I don't think I really get upset about that. I get upset if the Jets do the thing that they did last year, where they got dog walked by Colorado. That was really horrifying to watch, and it's been a bit of a recurring theme that the playoffs are not very kind to the Jets. And so I think this year probably will go better, but I look at the next couple of weeks into the regular or wrapping up the regular season into the playoffs, and I just wonder, are the Jets going to show us that they can truly be better than they were in the past, right? Will they show us that they are really a serious playoff team? Now they're going to have to rely on internal improvements and, Schenn and Tanev to kind of improve the depth areas where Winnipeg has maybe, been a little bit on the weaker side. And I just don't think that those guys are going to really fix what is Winnipeg's biggest gaps. The 5v5 offense for this team, still kind of a concern. Against bad opponents, it doesn't really show up, but I think if you start facing those Dallas squads and Vegas and teams like that, you actually start to notice a little bit more, a lot of my higher level, bigger concerns. And so I feel like Winnipeg really needed to come away with a bigger deadline, and they just didn't. And the rest of the regular season is going to bring in some difficult opponents, some tougher teams, and the Jets still might win the President's Trophy and walk away with it with a pretty fair advantage and margin over the rest of the teams that are fighting for this trophy. But if Winnipeg can't advance deep into the playoffs, I really don't care what the regular season brought. I will fondly look back on it, but I won't be happy. And I think that that's a really tough thing because on the one hand, I don't really want to invalidate everything that the Jets have fought for this year, but we're used to this being an issue now. We know that the Jets are good regular season performers. It's the playoffs where they have not shown up, or when they did, it was only for brief moments. And then, all of the weaknesses and issues with the team suddenly got exposed. And so I feel very frustrated. I feel like the Jets had a big opportunity and they just didn't make the most of it. And the road ahead does not get easier. Right now, the Jets are slated to face Calgary. I think you really want that to be the case because if it's the second wild card and somehow Colorado slips far enough for that, which ain't happening, mind you, but if it does, the Jets would have a really nasty first round opponent. I don't care if the Avs are like limping into the playoffs with some like 8-game losing streak. The moment that they get to the postseason, you just know that team is built different. They are like super experienced, built to win, an absolute nightmare matchup for the Jets. Winnipeg's best opportunity is for Colorado to basically get the Wild out of the third seed, which actually does seem pretty likely. The Avs, I think, are currently on pace to absolutely do so, even though Minnesota has a game in hand. And if Dallas and Colorado play each other in the first round, that is like one of the biggest godsends the Jets can ask for. Because like Winnipeg, I don't think that they plan to change anything. I don't think that they're going to mess with the lines all that much. And so they really have to lean on Hellebuck, the power play, and other teams taking each other out. Vegas, for their part, would face, I guess, Minnesota, unless somebody else sneaks into that first wild card. I think the Knights are likely to take on the dregs of, I guess, the Central Division, but um, if it ends up being like a Los Angeles or something, that's another possibility. Again, I don't really think that's going to happen. Although LA does have a couple of games in hand on Minnesota, so conceivably they could push up into the first wild card. But because the Pacific Division, like second and third place spots, don't exactly have high points totals, that kind of makes that a lot harder. So. Most likely that first spot's going to be a Central Division team, and it's not going to be a particularly good one if it's Minnesota. So, you'll still have Vegas prowling around in the playoff picture, one of Dallas or Colorado. I guess if I have to choose one, I think Colorado might come out of this one. I just have a sneaking suspicion they're going to do one of those things where they go on a really unholy tear during the playoffs and they kind of get through all the way to the Western Conference Finals or something near it. And that's not really a slight against Dallas. I know that on paper they've had a better season, and you see a lot of incredible stuff from their 5v5 offense. It's just Colorado's been there before. They've won it all. They know how to come away with a cup. And this team, I just feel the way that they've overhauled in the absence of Landeskog and with their newfound center depth, they are a very scary team. So all I can say is we really have to hope that, in my mind, Colorado is the one that you probably want to exit first. Dallas is very stingy. Colorado is very fast. And I would rather have stingy than fast. But curious to know your thoughts on this. Is there an opponent here that you would prefer? I feel like it's such a loser mentality for me to even be talking about this, but this is now the reality the Jets have to face. They didn't do enough at the trade deadline, so they're going to have to hope that the rest of the competitive field starts to winnow out and that Hellebuck faces less crazy monster teams, right? But it is what it is. The Jets have made their bed. It is time for them to lay in it, and hopefully it doesn't kill them. But obviously, I want to talk about how bad this situation is. Are the acquisitions really that bad? Is there a chance that they might fit in and help this team? We'll talk about what Tanev and Schenn might mean for the squad in their upcoming playoff quest. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us as it's been a bit of a frustrating show, I can't lie. I've had a lot of mixed feelings about Winnipeg's performance during this trade deadline. And, on the backdrop of two big wins against Philadelphia and New Jersey on back-to-back evenings, you'd think, wow, how can you be ungrateful for not only a really winning team in first place, but, a trade deadline where you brought in some depth? And I don't entirely disagree with parts of the premise, right? And I think where I still get hung up is that I always look towards the playoffs. That for me is the barometer of if anything that you've done matters. And I look at Tanev and Schenn. Tanev is probably not much of an upgrade on anyone in the bottom six. He'll get fourth line minutes. That's where you probably want to keep him. And Brandon is relatively fast. He hits hard. I mean, he'll do some PK stuff. He'll block shots, but he's 33 now, and his game has really declined since he's left Winnipeg. The version of him that's been playing for Seattle recently is really a shell of the player that he was when he left Winnipeg. And it wasn't like he was a superior standout for the Jets either at the end. He was a really good defensive forward, and that was basically it. Now, he doesn't really bring a lot of transition game. I think his overall offensive production has been very modest. You're just not getting a lot out of him now. And I don't really think that if I were to have a choice between him or Gustafsson or Kupari or some of these other guys, that I'd choose Tanev over them. I would probably prefer, even Barron. I just don't really think Tanev at this stage of his career is a guy who moves the needle. But he's, I guess, cheap wing depth, although the pick that the Jets gave up, not exactly cheap. A 2027 second rounder is not inexpensive. So great, I guess. Schenn is a bigger concern for me because he's a very big physical defender, but he doesn't really move the puck well. And my suspicion is that, now that he's on the right side, Staley's going to play with him. And if that's the case, that's going to be a really bad defensive pairing. You've got two guys who are very tall, who don't move the puck well, who will surrender lots of scoring chances in the slot, who probably won't clear out the crease that effectively. And sure, Schenn will actually be more physically effective in terms of using the body and laying out some big checks. But beyond that, man, I think the rest of his game has a lot of glaring gaps, and he's also 35. The real kicker with Schenn is that he's also got another year on his contract. I had no idea. I thought he was a rental. He is not. So that's really not optimal for the Jets. And I wonder why you even re-sign Colin Miller if your intention is to then bring in Luke Schenn. Because, like, Schenn's going to be the guy that Arniel likes. I can almost guarantee you that for a fact. Miller is going to be riding more pines. So I just feel like on the one hand, they're not the worst acquisitions you could possibly make. I probably would have really been upset if the Jets did the same deal that Toronto did for Scott Lawton, where they gave up like a first and Fraser Minton. But I also can't say that I'm particularly happy about all of this. I think the acquisitions give the Jets warm bodies, and that to me is probably it. We're not seeing needle movers. We're not really seeing a big improvement. And if Stanley plays with Schenn, this is actually going to be worse for the Jets. So, yeah, all I can say is I'm not really feeling great about the playoff run. My only hope is that all of these other teams that are in the playoff picture, a number of them didn't exactly improve. And so, you hope that that's enough and that maybe, with Dallas or Colorado offing one of the other in the first round, that you can perhaps, narrow down the playoff field enough to have a shot. But all I can say is I am not feeling great about that being my primary calculus for how deep the Jets get. I really wanted Winnipeg to swing here. I feel like the team deserved it. Arniel sort of hinted that he was actually not happy. He said it was unfortunate earlier today that Nelson didn't get, acquired by Winnipeg. And like Chevy gave some reasons and stuff. And I get it if it's Nelson who said no. But again, at some point, the Jets just have to deliver results. And, I don't know how I feel about all of this, but I'm not getting great vibes about our upcoming playoff run. And on a day in which the Jets really embarrass New Jersey, you would have the opposite reaction, or at least you would expect to, but the trade deadline kind of feels like the thing that's going to be the bigger problem here. So, yeah, Winnipeg, all I can say is good luck. Please prove me wrong. I really don't want to watch another, first round and out or even second round and out. The Jets really have to make the most of this. Winnipeg only has, so many more good years of elite Connor Hellebuck. And maybe they go really far. Maybe the Jets have a deep run. Maybe they don't. Maybe Hellebuck keeps putting up, career best numbers every season from now until the end of his contract. But tomorrow is not promised. And at some point, the Jets are going to have to wake up and do something about that. Even if it doesn't work, you had better be darn sure that you take at least some kind of a real swing. Bringing in depth options every trade deadline just ain't going to cut it. But it is what it is. The Jets have made their decision. It's now time for the rest of the league to hopefully take a bit of a crappy pill and fall behind, because if not, the Jets might have a really tough road ahead in the postseason. But let me know if you think the Jets are going to advance more than 1 or 2 rounds. Drop your predictions for their playoff run in the comments below, or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.